Hi everyone, welcome to week 3 of summer school. As everybody knows, last week we focused on fiction and nonfiction. And before we get started on this week, I actually want to give a shout out to a few kids who did just an amazing job with that last week. I'm going to start off with Miss McDonald's class, and I want to shout out Ali and Miriam. I really appreciate how you guys took your time on the ed puzzle. You learned the material, and then you went on to the quizzes and did an amazing job. For my class, I want to shout out Maritza and Darlene. Thank you for attending the Zoom lessons. Thank you for double checking your work by going onto the ed puzzles, and thank you for taking your time on the quizzes and doing an excellent job. Okay, moving on. So this week we're going to add 2 new genres to our list, and we're going to begin off with poetry. So today we're going to learn on about what is poetry, how do we organize poetry, and what are some elements of poetry. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is what exactly is poetry, or what are poems? I know that many of you may recognize them by the way that they're organized. They're pretty easy to just look at and know that they're a poem, but I actually want to give you the definition of what is a poem. A poem is a piece of writing that is both a speech and a song. And one main thing about poem is that it involves a lot of things like repetition, rhyming, feelings, emotions. I kind of want you to think about like Cat in the Hat, like Dr. Seuss, those type of books that really put a lot of poetry, speeches, songs in their style. So that's what a poem is. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is organization of poetry, or how is poetry organized. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put it out there that poetry is very different from what you have done this whole year in 4th grade. I know that many of us really focused this year on expository writing, on writing main ideas, complete sentences, things like that, but poetry is a complete opposite. Poetry is organized into 2 different things. It's organized in lines and stanzas. The first one we're going to look at is line. So a line is a row of words in a poem. So unlike expository writing or narrative writing, a line is a sentence without having the structure of a sentence, meaning that a line is literally just that, a row of words. So 1 row, 2 row, 3 rows, 4 rows, 5 rows. 5 rows or 5 lines. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So in this poem, we have 10 lines or 10 rows of words. Now, one thing that I want you to quickly notice is that in lines, we don't have to have the typical structure of a complete sentence. We don't have to have a capital letter. We don't have to have a period. We don't have to have a subject and predicate. It's literally just words in a row. So for this one, we have 10 lines. Okay, moving on. In poetry, we have stanzas. Going back to what we're used to paragraphs. We're used to writing in paragraphs, but for poetry, we don't call them paragraphs. We call them stanzas. So a stanza is a group of lines that form a verse. An easy way to remember is it's just a paragraph. So 1 stanza, these are together. 2 stanzas, 3 stanzas, 4 stanzas. So in this particular poem, we have 4 stanzas. A great way to tell when a stanza ends and a new one forms is by looking at the gap in between. So if you see here, we have a gap, we have a gap, and we have a gap. So in total, in this poem, we have 4 stanzas. So a quick look at lines versus stanzas. A line is just a row of words. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 lines. And we have 1, 2 stanzas. We have 2 stanzas here, 10 lines. For this poem, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We have 20 lines, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas. Now your turn. I want you to take a minute and I want you to A, identify the number of lines, and B, identify the number of stanzas. Go ahead and do so. Okay, moving on. Now we're going to look at some of the elements or some of the things that we find in the words of poetry. So we're going to have rhyme, imagery, alliteration, repetition, and tone and mood to look at. So the first one we're going to look at is imagery. So when I think about imagery, I want you to think about the five senses. I want you to think about hearing. I want you to think about smelling with your nose, tasting with your mouth, feeling with your hands, and seeing with your eyes. So imagery is when an author is trying to describe something so that you can see the image in your head without actually being there. So if we took a look at our example poem, I'm going to go ahead and read a few lines. We are a fisherman in a flat scene. All day long we are in love with water. The fish are naked, the fish are always awake. They are the color of old spoons and caramel. The sun reaches down, but the floor is not sight. So this poem is trying to help me imagine I'm thinking the sea, the beach, things like that, by describing the fisherman, describing the fish, describing the color of the sun, describing the floor, those kinds of things. Now, I want you to take a second and I want you to read this poem and I want you to tell me, what is this poem trying to help you imagine by describing? Okay, moving on. Now we're going to look at rhyme. So rhyming is a pretty easy concept. A lot of us have really picked up on it since we've been learning about this in kindergarten. But rhyming is basically when a a word repeats the sounds at the end. So for example, cat and hat have the same ending sound. Love and dove have the same ending sound. Red and bed, they rhyme because they have the same ending sound. Sail and sail rhyme because they have the same ending sound. So when you're looking for words that rhyme, you're looking for words that have the same ending sound. Looking at my example poem, some of the words that I see that rhyme are bug and rug. With I also see hop and mop, and I also see tug and bug. Now, I want you to take a look at this poem and see if you can find any words that rhyme. Remember, rhymes are words that end with the same sound. Go ahead. Next, alliteration. So, alliteration is the repetition of initial sounds in words. It's very different from rhyming because it's just the beginning sound of a word. So in rhymes, we look for ending sounds. In alliteration, we look for beginning sounds. So these, I know you guys have heard of them because they're basically tongue twisters. Whenever, like for example, this one, she sells seashells on the seashore. She sells seashells, I'm for sure. For if she sells seashells on the seashore, then I'm sure she sells seashells. And the one sound that we see constantly repeated is the S. In this one, I have heard how hedgehogs hog the hedge. The sound that keeps getting repeated is the H. In this one, there's various different sounds. Like here we see the P gets repeated, the C gets repeated here, the K gets repeated here, and so on. In your poem on this side, I want you to quickly just find what sound gets repeated in any of these lines and type it below. Moving on, so we also have a lot of repetition in poetry, which is basically just words getting repeated, words that get used over and over again. So looking at my model poem, I'm carsick, open the window. I'm carsick, take this pill. I'm carsick, rest your eyes. I'm carsick, shh, be still. What words get repeated? I'm carsick. Simple as that. We just look for words that get repeated over and over. Now, look at your poem and find some words that get repeated. Type them below. Okay, great. We're on to our last poetry term. So the last thing that we got to look at is tone or mood. So these things basically mean the exact same thing. And they're basically just how the writer is feeling or its attitude in the poem. So let's take a look at some toners and moods that we have here. We have angry, bored, confident. It's basically just feeling. So you're looking at how the author was feeling when he was writing this poem. Was he feeling happy? Was he feeling hopeful? Was he feeling scared, sad, sleepy? Here's a lot of them, and there could be very many more. So let's look at this one. I shut my door to keep you out. Won't do no good to stand and shout. Won't listen to thing you say. Just time you took yourself away. I lock my door to keep me here. Until I'm sure you disappear. So I'm like, by looking at some of these words, I shut my door, I'll shout, I won't listen. I think that the tone or the mood here is definitely angry. Whoever wrote this poem was angry at the moment. Now, I want you to read your poem and I want you to type below, what do you think the tone or the mood is in this poem? Okay, so excellent. That was the last thing we got to do. So before we go, just to quickly go over, poetry is organized in lines and stanzas, and we have different elements like rhymes, repetition, alliteration, tone, and mood. But one thing we didn't discuss was, what is the purpose of poetry? Does poetry inform us, persuade us, or entertain us? Type below. Excellent. Yes, poetry is for entertaining. Poetry, like I said at the very beginning, is all about feelings, emotions. It can be songs, it can be speeches, it can be writing. So the main purpose of a poem is to entertain us. Now that you guys have done an excellent job going through this Edpuzzle, what you have to do is you go and log into Google Classroom. You complete the poetry Google quiz using everything you have learned here. And lastly, comment done in the comment box.